You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. And, of course, we decided we're going to do something a little different today. This isn't actually based on any kind of news, anything that we read, nothing like that. Just had the idea, like, hey, let's talk about the Jedi today. let's pick on the Jedi, because you know the Sith. I mean, they get a lot of crap.
They get out enough.
Yep. And so what I did was I actually put up a poll. Actually, so there's like two, right? There's one that's actually in this chat right now that's talking about, is the Jedi too dogmatic, right? So far, a couple of votes are in. Both votes say no, they're not. Then I put up another poll, actually, and I don't know if anybody's even truly responded to it. Let me check it out, because I kind of slipped it in there. And it was basically like something that, let me see. It's better if I actually read the thing instead of getting it wrong and then I have to correct myself. Okay, so it's Battle of the Female Characters. So who would you rather see next? Either as the focus of live action or an animated show, or at least featured. And the choices were Dr. Aphra, Mara Jade, or Kira. And one vote so far. It's like I said, nobody... I only put it up like a day or so ago, but so far Mara Jade is in the lead.
I kind of figured that would be the case.
Yeah, I mean, and if I'm being honest, that's probably who should be the next person, you know, to get any kind of a lead like that. And then Ted, of course, joins us. He says, "Why ain't y'all dressed like the thumbnail? So disappointed."
I kind of am.
Yeah, actually, you're you're closer. And look, you know, my Jedi armor, unfortunately, is at the dry cleaners right now, so you know, I couldn't really do it, right?
Right.
Yeah, we're gonna try to do some more fun thumbnails like that. The characters will make their appearance. I mean, right now they were kind of big, but let me give them a little love here. They're kind of big, but one of the complaints, well, it isn't really a complaint, but I think a lot of times when you see like a podcast or a discussion show like ours, somewhere in the thumbnail you usually see the hosts. You know, they'll usually feature themselves, and we haven't really done that. And sometimes I think that maybe people don't necessarily know what they're getting. Well, they're not really getting this either, but you know, it's like, it's not cosplay now, right? But yeah, it's one of those fun things that I think, you know, people might enjoy. But yeah, I mean, what actually, you know, you're the one that actually suggested this topic. So what led you to this one?
Well, it's funny. I was kind of coming through some message boards, and there was this guy. There's a Star Wars club at his university.
Wow.
Exactly, right?
Yeah, we should find out which university that is and try to, you know, either do a show live from there, or maybe
Right.
somehow, you know, can these guys maybe subscribe to our channel, or, you know, that would be nice.
Absolutely. So one of their topics was, you know, where the Jedi get it right, you know, were their philosophies and ideologies correct. And so they had a whole debate about it. So I was like, you know, that'd be cool. We could debate that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one of the reasons why I think it's cool is because you could almost make the argument that, you know, they came by these philosophies based on what was needed or whatever. And so the question becomes, you know, did it ultimately become their undoing? I mean, in some ways, just based on what we saw in the movies, we know that, yeah, to a degree, you know, but some of it too was them getting away from it. Remember, they started getting kind of arrogant, and, you know, they just, I mean, they you could also make the argument they got a little bit away from what they were supposed to be doing. and that could have helped or hurt. So yeah, there's all kinds of little nuances and discussion points. Because I mean, are we talking all the way back to like the beginning, like old Republic and before? Are we, like how what era are we really discussing here?
I would take it like Phantom Menace through, you know, Return of the Jedi.
Well, Phantom Menace through Revenge of the Sith, I could almost see. Because, I mean, if you think about it, like, even in the original trilogy, they started to get away from, all that, like, attachments being forbidden and, some of this other stuff. I mean, there really were no Jedi then.
Well, I think Yoda was still kind of keeping a hold to that because when Luke, was trying to go save Han and Leia, basically in Empire Strikes Back, you know, he's like, well, should I let them die? He was like, only you know,
If you honor what they
if
fight
you
for,
honor what
then
they fight
yeah.
for, or something like that. So
But I
it's
mean,
kind of
that's
like,
not, I mean, kind of, but that's not really an attachment. It's more like, look, man, you got to sacrifice soldiers for the cause sometimes. It's kind of like, sometimes you got to let somebody die to do
I think
that.
that's kind of like going with the whole no attach. Like I guess he didn't want him to be too attached to it because if that fear, because I think it was basically like if you're fearing of losing them if they die, then that fear can lead
Oh
you.
yeah. Well, that it goes into that too.
Because
David
that's why he
comes
kept
in,
telling him, so remember your failure at the cave.
right? But a lot of that, hey David, and we know it's Star
Dave.
Wars Day, like right in the middle of a sentence here,
Right.
and I popped this on. But no, the failure at the cave though was the fact that he was fearful. Period. That's one of the reasons why it's like, well, what do you? It's like, well, what can I expect in there? It's only what you take with you. Well, he's he's doing what any of us would have done. Like, I don't know what's in there. I'm taking every piece of weaponry and everything that I have, right?
Right.
Because
You
that's the
basically had like a
thing.
whole utility belt around.
Sure, I'd be like, listen, can I go get a couple things back from the ship? Can I, what
Right.
are the parameters here? Can I wheel some stuff in? Can I bring R2 with me to carry some stuff? I'd be,
All right.
when
At
you
least
look
it's
at
a
the,
flashlight.
I mean, when you look at that cave, I would be afraid too. But I think
Hmm.
the lesson that Yoda was trying to teach him was it's almost like it's one thing to be prepared for something, but it's another thing to where, you're almost causing things to happen by your preparedness in a sense.
See, so this is like, and this is kind of kind of plays into our conversation tonight because there's a lot of things that the Jedi believe, and we're going to get into some of them, like peace and selflessness, um, using the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack, um, and like there's some things like the control, the discipline, do or do not. There is no try. Those different things. Okay, some of that stuff, but then when it starts coming into um like attachments, like I said, that's one of the big ones that I think that a lot of people kind of look at because if you're supposed to be loving and you have love for all man or all forms of life, if you're encouraging that, then it's like, well, if my love takes me deeper, you think that would make you go to be more light-minded, if you will.
Well,
I mean, I get
I think a lot of it
that.
has to do with almost like how the military is, right? Or sometimes the
Right.
police. They're kind of like you don't want there to be a family or somebody that they're attached to because that they might be less apt maybe to go into a dangerous, situation or now there's things that criminals or something could, use as leverage against them. And I think that that's kind of where it's at with the Jedi is the fact that, look, when you're dealing with that, you're not really fully engaged and immersed in,
Present.
yeah. I mean, present in the moment, but then also just, dealing with the force, dealing with a lot of the things you have to. Now, of course, if we're talking specifically, and this is where it gets a little tricky because, excuse me, that's why if you go back, like even during the High Republic, and this is where it gets a little weird too, because the High Republic actually was a little bit looser as far as their rules and everything else. That's why there have been rumors, by the way, of like an Acolyte season 2. I've been seeing like a lot of stuff percolating, if you will, that could actually happen.
I don't think so, man. I think
Well, I no, but
that was
here's
so abysmal.
exactly. But here's the only thing. I mean, first of all, yeah, they brought in Plagueis, and I thought Plagueis was cool. And obviously they
Mhm.
were bringing in Yoda, and of course there is a part of you that's like, oh man, it might ruin it though. So there is that, right? However, from a story perspective, and maybe the Acolyte isn't the place where you'd want to cover this. Maybe definitely not. My my issue is this. Okay, so you're talking about this period of time at the end of the High Republic. That's where the Acolyte season 1 takes place.
Mhm.
They obviously still have a lot of the attitudes towards the Jedi, the Force, everything else that was present in the High Republic, like in the proper, right? Because not just the tail end. However, there's only something like 70 years or something between where we're at with the Acolyte and then where we get to with the Phantom Menace. So from a story perspective, I would like to know what happened. Because one of the reasons why I'm always a little bit hesitant is probably the right word to criticize some of the things that are present in the philosophies of the Jedi around the time of the Phantom Menace is because I don't really know what led to that change. Now, you can argue that, okay, maybe it was necessary for whatever reason that it came into be, and maybe it just outlived its usefulness, and maybe, once again, they should have taken a second look. But I would really like to know why. What happened? Because obviously it's when Yoda, we don't even know how Yoda became the
Grand
Jedi,
Master.
yeah, like the whole leader of the council. Last we leave, man, he's like, he's just out there, just kind of on a sabbatical or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sure there'll be it would be cool to see if they would just do it right, and I think it's just too much damage has been done.
Yeah, I know.
I just really feel like
Yeah, but
it would
here's
be
a
bad.
here's
It wouldn't be so bad if it was done okay and it just needed some touching up. But
right.
that thing needs I mean, you almost need to start from scratch. Like you need to do season one completely over.
Well, I don't. They could salvage it. It would be tough, and obviously the current showrunners wouldn't be the ones to do it. That's why I would almost rather okay, they're gonna tell this story, maybe tell it in the books. Ronaldo says, "Cool pick. Daryl literally looks like Revan." It's kind of funny because that was one of the when I was putting it into the old image generator. That's one of the things I said. Make him a Sith Lord, kind of in the style of Revan. So glad that came across.
Well
Okay,
done, sir.
now Ronaldo's actually chatting about something that's relevant to our topic today. Not that the photos aren't, but he says, I mean, you can continue the threads we saw in the Acolyte, but you don't need a season 2, and that's really where I'm going.
Or call it something else. Like, okay, maybe like the Acolyte was the start of it.
Mm,
Change the name and kind of like he said, like kind of keep the thread of the
So
story.
bad
But
when you got to actually change the name.
that's what I'm saying. That's what I mean, because it's so bad,
Hey
man.
man,
It's
at the
like,
rate they're going, they might need to change the name of Star Wars, right? Call it like
right,
Intergalactic
right,
Battles, Episode
right,
1. You know, it's
right. Yes, Death Star Chronicles or something.
yeah,
You know,
right. I mean, something.
no. When we look at some of the Jedi's, things like, they want them to be like monks. They don't want them to have any attachments to anything like of value. Like, you're not seeking money or riches or, treasure or anything like that. Okay. What do you want them to be like? Very plain, very humble, very almost meek, but ready to defend if necessary. But they have this whole rule of like not killing any unarmed um opponents. I don't I understand that. That's almost like, our police force, like you shouldn't be shooting unarmed, assailants or whatnot. However, like if you have somebody like Palpatine, for example, like he doesn't necessarily need, he is a weapon. He
Well,
doesn't,
but that's it. He's
so
when it's unarmed, I think if you're another Force user, I don't necessarily think that's
I'll
because
say, does
technically
that
the
apply?
yeah, I mean, because the Force is a weapon. I mean, you're absolutely right. You can't say you're unarmed. Dude's got like Force lightning. He can choke you. He can do all this.
All right.
I would say that's pretty much up there. I mean, that's why I was so impressed in Revenge of the Sith. To see him using a lightsaber was just so bizarre to me. I remember
Man.
just the concept of it, because it's like,
Right.
well, he doesn't really need to do it. I mean, it's
And
like,
the fact he had it kind of like up his sleeve, I thought that was so cool.
well, yeah. I mean, that's like one of those tricks. Ronaldo says, like a Plagueis show with Kamir and continue that story. He's still on the Acolyte. Or just make a Clone Wars animation style show and finish the story there.
That's a good idea. Yeah, that's a really good idea, Ronaldo. And I like that. I really like that.
Yeah, that's what you need to do. Like, do it in animation and let Filoni do it.
And then
Because
that way you don't have, you just get some really good voice actors, and you don't have to worry about, people who actually can speak the language.
Poor guy.
I mean, God bless him, but jeez, I know he did. I know he gave it like 110% too. And that's why I'm trying not to bag on him, because it's like,
Hey, I'm not gonna bag
listen,
on him, because if I was an actor and you threw me in like, I don't know, some other country, I'm quite certain I'm not gonna be able to deliver probably anything. It'd probably sound like a kindergartner, like trying to, sound it out or whatever. But no, I mean, that's a good point. If that's continued, because I think that's a story that needs to be continued, and it's very much relevant to what we're talking about here tonight, because I think that you have to look at the fact that you have like one set of rules and maybe like one set of just philosophies and things like that in the High Republic, and then it shifts dramatically in very little time, comparatively speaking. I mean, when you think of the tens of thousands of years that the Jedi have been in existence, and all of a sudden, like in this little, like 1 century period, it turns into this just complete, I mean, in some ways, a 180, right? Because one of the things in the High Republic that they were about was very much individuality. Like everybody connected to the Force in a very unique way, and people were pretty much, I mean, they were encouraged to seek that out. I think that whatever led to it, again, I get the no attachments thing, because whether it's something that's material or whether it's a person or something, it's just something that, again, being afraid. And maybe when the Acolyte was threatening, they didn't do it, of course, but when they were threatening to make this show more about the Sith and how the Sith started to infiltrate the Jedi a little bit, remember all that? I think a lot of the reason why you saw that, because again, one of the big things with the whole attachment thing is the fear. It's really not even about the attachment, it's about the fear of losing it. And as we know, fear is one of the major things that leads to the dark side. So I think maybe what was happening was that was like a window into it. And, again, this is speculation until it's confirmed in some canonized material. But, maybe Yoda's just like, you know what? Yeah, we're not gonna have attachments anymore. Memo on Monday. From here on out, no more attachments. That's it.
I don't want to see any emails,
Yeah.
nothing.
Right, exactly. Can't even attach anything to an email. That's how serious we're going to be about this.
Now, do you think that if Qui-Gon would have been on the council, he probably would have been alive to train Anakin?
Yeah.
Do you think if that would have happened, things would have gone differently?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because I think that one of the problems that Anakin had was he was seeking approval. And Obi-Wan was pretty hard on him. Obi-Wan saw a lot of the things that, could draw him away. And he was very by the book. He was very hard on him. He wasn't really tuning things to Anakin's personality, where Qui-Gon had a way of diffusing it. He had this calm about him, and he also understood a lot of where Anakin was coming from. And I think that was the biggest problem that Anakin had. He didn't think that Obi-Wan understood him. In fact, he said as much in Attack of the Clones. So that's where you started to see the fracture. Now, of course, Anakin had the utmost respect for Obi-Wan, and he loved him like an older brother at that point, and even a father figure in some respects. But that started to fracture when Obi-Wan was just so, I think, afraid of what Anakin would do that he kept him on a tighter leash than he probably should have. And I think that was a big, big thing in the downfall. So no, I don't think that Anakin would have even fallen, because I don't think he would have sought out Palpatine. See, that's the other thing, is that Palpatine came in, became the wise and father figure in Qui-Gon's absence. And I think that that's where you really see a big shift, because you had this tonal shift. Obviously, now it's like a Sith Lord guy who doesn't really care. It's a means to an end for him. And I think that, once Anakin became Vader and he realized all too late that it's like, oh, this guy was like full of crap. He didn't have my best interest at heart. He was lying to me the whole time. Let me
Yeah.
before you go, let me get to some of these chats. Well, there's really only one, but but still, it's an important one. It's a question from Ronaldo. He says, when we eventually see episode 10, whenever that'll be. By the way, I think I heard that was canceled too. You think we'll ever see the Jedi philosophy finally change?
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, kind of has already anyway, right? I mean, Luke, the way he was training Rey, if you want to, I should say barely training Rey. I mean, I think that he was talking about, and this is a really good juxtaposition too, because Luke almost went too far the other way. He was looking at the failures of the Jedi because of their philosophies and their strict adherence to them, and not being able to see certain things. And then, of course, it took Yoda to come back from beyond and give Luke another life lesson about how failure is a part of being a teacher. It happens. And I think that Rey is seeing all this. Plus, she has the Jedi text, so she can see things in more of a totality. And when we see her, presumably, eventually in episode 10, I think you're going to see that.
Well, and I was going to ask, like, do you think that the text, the Jedi text, and everything like that, do you think that that should completely be destroyed like Luke wanted to, because he wanted to like get rid of it, with the tree
Yeah,
and
like I
everything
said,
like
man,
that. He
he
kind
went
of,
he went pretty far the other way. He's just like, I mean, he was almost at Kylo's point, let the past die kind of a thing.
mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of that was because Luke was really getting emotional because Kylo was his nephew. So, he basically it was just one of those things where I think that unfortunately that failure was a little bit more personal than just if,
a
little
random student failed.
some
Like, I
random
failed my
kid.
family. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it, it's like I remember seeing this meme. Oh man, I wish I had saved it. I don't even. I may have sent it to you, but I don't think I did. It was basically like, Vader's or Luke is, Vader's like killed like billions of people, and Luke is like, oh, I see good in him, right? And then Kylo has a bad dream, and he's ready to kill him. It's sort of like, dude, where's the benefit of the doubt here? So
like, give me a break at least.
So I think it's a little bit more personal. Now Ronaldo says, well, Luke was training his nephew, which is something the Jedi from the prequels would never do. That's a good point.
Yeah, but it's at least in that time, it's like, who else is going to do it?
Well,
remember?
I mean, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah, exactly. Because
there's no other Jedi to send them to. So it's like,
well,
kinda have
that's
to.
not technically true. You got Ahsoka.
Well, that's presuming that she's around.
She is around. We saw her like interacting with Luke like well before that. Now, you're right. Whether she's around like 30 years later.
That's what I mean.
She
Like,
was
Kylo was.
I mean, she was, starting to get up there a little bit. Like I think
Mhm.
she was like in her 40s or something during the time of Return of the Jedi. So, yeah, that put her like 70 something, but I don't know how long that species lives actually. I'm assuming,
Yeah. So let's see.
you going through the the list.
Yes. Yeah. The the Jedi handbook here.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
It says, Jedi Masters are expected to train only one Padawan at a time. I get that because I think you need to kind of be able to focus on that, like,
Right.
to make sure that like they're getting all that they can get out of the lesson before you really send them off to the trials or they kill a Sith Lord, which most of them had to do the trials. And I really would love to see what that was like. I mean, we kind of got a chance to see that with Yoda, I think, in the Clone Wars. When he went to that one place where they had all the Force people flying around, little.
Yeah, I remember that. I know what you're talking about.
And one of the things is like, like you have to conquer your fear. Like, I know that's one of those trials that you kind of have to, you know, learn to master in order for you to become a knight. But or you have to defeat the Sith Lord. That's the other, route to becoming
Well,
a
if I
Jedi.
remember, that's kind of like testing out.
Yeah,
Like you
exactly.
could go through this long, drawn out process, but hey, you kill a Sith Lord, you're right at the top, buddy. You're testing out of the rest of this thing.
Right.
But I think even beyond that, though, part of the reason why you had the one Padawan thing is because you're forming a bond with that person. Like there's more than just the master teacher thing. And yeah, you're right. I mean, you have to devote all the attention and everything when you're dealing with that. It's not like when Yoda's teaching the class or some of these other Jedi are teaching in a more classroom setting. It's really more like you're forming a connection with this person. Ronaldo basically says, but when you look at Luke at in the Mandalorian, he just sounds like the old Jedi. Same thing with Ahsoka. Yeah, I guess. And then I think we're being somewhat trolled by one of our Twitch guys. It's like live long and prosper. Polar Knights.
Wrong show, but
Wrong show,
we do,
wrong
but we do
franchise.
make often Star Wars references.
Hey, you
Star
know
Trek
what?
references.
We do. And guess what? He just made it for us. That doesn't mean we won't, but now we don't have to because our Star Trek quota now has been met for this show, and so that's good. But yeah, I think that he sounded like the old Jedi, I think, because he was trying to honor Yoda and Obi-Wan. And he hadn't quite turned against the whole thing because, again, when he was looking at the failures, he was looking at it like, well, you guys are idiots. I would do it differently, right? But then he failed. And I think because of that and the weight of everything being on him, I think that failure actually rocked him a lot harder than it normally would have. And because of the emotional weight of that, I think that's why he just went the other way.
Yeah, I mean, I have to wonder, like, some of the things I think sometimes when you hold people back, it makes it harder for them to, um, I guess it makes them more susceptible a lot of times to lash out. It's kind of like when you have a kid and they're raised in a strict household, and then the moment they go off to college,
Mm-hmm.
they go
Oh, they go
crazy because
crazy.
they've been so confined. And one of the things I loved about my grandmother, who raised me, was that, like, she definitely gave me a lot of boundaries and things like that, but they weren't so strict as they were with my mom. And I think they kind of learned that lesson because, like, with me, they kind of like, all right, we'll let you do some things and, have your fun, but you can't cross this line. Like, you just can't go that far with it. We'll give you a lot of latitude, shall we say. But you know, at some point we do have, if we see you go too far, we got to reel you back in. And I think that's something that the Jedi, needed. And I think that's certain Jedi like Qui-Gon, um, uh, Quinlan Voss, and others. I think they would have more or less kind of been that way. Even Dooku, like, I think Dooku kind of allowed Qui-Gon to explore things a little bit more. That's why he knew about the whole prophecy thing, was because Dooku was studying all that. And I think that's kind of one of those one of those things that the Jedi really just missed out on, is that they were so worried about, it's kind of like Leia said,
I was just thinking that too.
the tighter you hold on, the more they slip through your fingers. And it's kind of like that's kind of what happens. I mean, granted, most were cool, but people like Anakin or others.
Well, that's it. And this is where I think that, see, it's not so much that Qui-Gon would have been any different as far as not enforcing things, but what he would have done is he would have had the presence of mind to make, he would have made Anakin's personality, like he would have manipulated it in a softer, easier way, made things seem like his idea. Like he just knew how to deal with him. Like I said, he was also very good. He was calm. He would be able to diffuse him. Whereas Obi-Wan was just basically like, no, you messed up. And, it's like he drops his lightsaber. It's like, this is your life, and he's all lecturing him outside the bar and all this stuff. And it's
Hmm.
just like, all right, dude, I get it, whereas Qui-Gon probably would have handled that scene a little bit differently. And I
Yeah.
don't think he would have exasperated Anakin to the degree that Obi-Wan did, which of course is part of what, because that's another thing too. I don't even think it's so much like from the philosophies that we talked about so far. I don't think any of them really are necessarily, like wrong or bad or anything like that. I just think it's a lot of the personality of the Jedi that are following them sometimes that, like when you're dealing with Obi-Wan at that time, because of course Obi-Wan chilled out and became more Qui-Gon-ish after, a time. Like if you look at the episode 4 Obi-Wan's completely different guy.
Yeah. Do you think that the Jedi were right for capturing kids? I want to say capture, but acquiring kids at such a young age before training them?
Well,
Or do you think?
there's a whole comic series that it dealt with that, actually, that really put a lot of emphasis and why it's done and all that stuff. So yeah, because I read that, I would 100% because of I don't remember every little thing about the explanation, but it did, it made sense. Well, it was a very interesting comic series. It went on, I forgot how many issues it was, but it was cool because it basically gave you the two sides. It gave you the whole like basically it was asking the question that, you're talking about right now. Is it a good idea? Because it dealt with this one, mother who was like, it actually brought tears to your eyes how, her baby was everything. And now the Jedi are taking them away. It's like, all because they're force sensitive.
Yeah, because it's like on one hand, it's like you're trying to control a narrative that may be like, okay, for example, it's like if you had a son and there was a way to test it, like, oh, this guy has a real big aptitude to, be a rock musician or like a basketball, like an NBA basketball player. But we got to get him, pretty much as a newborn so we can start, training him and whatnot. And it's like, well, how do you know he even wants to be a basketball player?
Oh, he will be
Like,
if that's how you raise him to be. And I
well,
think
that's what
that's kind of the thing. It's like, it's not like you really have a choice. And that's the thing when you're raising and you're conditioning these kids.
right. And that's what I'm saying. It's like, but I think the Jedi were more concerned with the possibility that you're a threat. And so they were looking at these
There,
kids like,
there was
okay,
that. There was that.
you have the potential to be a threat if we don't get you first. So we're going to take you away from your family, and your loved ones, and we're going to be your family now. And we're going to make sure that these abilities that we see in you are going to be used for good and not evil.
But see, that's not really what the intent was. And this, of course, was brought forth in the books. But even back in the Lucas days, which, by the way, Ronaldo loved your capturing kids. He thought that was pretty funny, actually. Really, what it was about was and that's why they had the midi-chlorian test, which I'm still not entirely happy about that one, but I'll let it go for now. But it did enforce the thing, right? It's kind of like the point being, if you had a really high aptitude, it was properly training and conditioning. Now, of course, you can always come back and say, well, it'd be great if, like, I don't know, maybe when you're 10 or 12 or something, you maybe come back almost like it's like college. Hey, I think I want to be a Jedi. Let me do it. But see, the problem is the way that the Force works, quote Han, is you actually have to be like trained from birth practically. Number one, because you don't want to develop all these bad habits, bad emotions, whatever can happen in the household or whatever, or just, living your life. And now they have to try to get you to unlearn all that stuff. But the other thing also was kind of like an aptitude thing, right? Like you have to, it's kind of like martial arts that way. Obviously, the younger that you are and, to try to teach these things, muscle memory, so on and so on, it's like if you get them from the time that they're little kids, well, really, you could say that about any athlete. Look at the Olympics. When you're training from the Olympics, they're getting these kids at like 4 or 5 years old. And a lot of times people are like, really, is that necessary? But yeah, and knowing an Olympic athlete myself, it's like when you see that all the work they have to put in order to get to that excellence, you have to do it from a very young age. And so I think that that's where that was coming from.
Yeah, but I think like as a parent, like you should have a choice. Like, I think like if the Jedi come to you, it's like, hey, we sense that your child, Eric, is force sensitive and then he has a high aptitude for the force. It's up to you and your, wife if you want him or her to come with us to be, we could train him as a Jedi, or we can just let him be. Just understand that he may have certain attributes, or he might tap into certain abilities that he doesn't quite understand. He doesn't know how to control, and we may have, you know, we may have the answer for that because obviously we're force sensitive and we can, you know,
Well, don't forget, a lot of what we would call the negative connotations actually came from the Acolyte. And that's because the message, right? It's like almost like, okay, everything about Star Wars, let's turn the Jedi really bad now. It really wasn't so much about that. Like in the pure canon, it's not really necessarily about that. I mean, there's some of that in a sense because the idea is that the Force guides them to particular individuals, and others they don't. So
mm,
there's a little bit of a will of the Force thing going. There's a little bit. I mean, there's like more than the Acolyte tried to turn it into, oh, we're coming and stealing your kids against your will kind of thing because that's just where we are in 2024 and 2025. I mean, that's just the this message that they're putting it out, and they're trying to teach it through their show. And that really wasn't the purity of the canon when Lucas was coming up with this stuff, and a lot of the expanded universe stories. That was never really a thing. That's why you had Broom Kid. Broom Kid, of course, by then nobody, that was the Last Jedi. So it was almost like the same thing, right? Who's gonna take him? You?
hmm. I don't know. Like I said, I think in some ways, like the Jedi just, I think like the poll suggests that they were too dogmatic. I think they were so beholden to this concept that they couldn't. It's almost like there's no possibility that they could be wrong.
Well, and that was it. And Yoda even pointed that out in was it Revenge of the Sith or was it Attack of the Clones? I think it was Attack of the Clones, where he was talking about the arrogance, even the more experienced ones, when he was floating in his little space
Mhm.
pod or whatever. Which, by the way, the poll is at 50-50 now.
For what?
For our Was a Jedi Philosophy too
Oh.
dogmatic? 50% yes, 50% no. So it's dead even. Now, we have enough viewers right now that they could break the tie. So just hop in the chats if you want to break the tie. um,
Do you
but
know somebody on a somewhat similar topic, but is relevant? I should say. Uh, do you know there's like a group called Jedi, and it's justice, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion.
oh, man, George would be like,
Like
wow.
this whole DEI thing is like went to Star Wars level
Well,
now.
hey, if you look at
So
Jedi,
episodes,
I mean, DEI is in there. You just add the
yeah, I
J,
know.
and there
That's what.
you go, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. So
Oh,
it's
that's
justice.
funny, dude. That is funny. All right, we
Yeah,
got somebody. Thronkill. Thronkill says, "Arrogance blinds those." Yes, that was the thing. And then of course Ronaldo comes in and says it was an Attack of the Clones.
right.
So yeah, and that was basically one of the main things that was happening here is the fact that you did have a lot of arrogance. You did have a lot of things that were going on all through the Clone Wars, and that was part of Palpatine's plan, was he wanted to destroy the Jedi from within. And
Hmm.
because being generals and leading a war effort wasn't what they were designed to do, he knew that that was going to put strain on them and that a lot of cracks would happen from within if he pursued that. So I think that in a lot of cases, that's what you get. Now, David has a different perspective, unsurprisingly. He says they weren't too dogmatic. They're heroes. Not perfect, but still the best the Star Wars universe has to offer. And that was one of the things that that was one of the things that Lucas was always trying to do. Even though, I mean, with the prequels, he was, maybe it wasn't so brightly white kind of thing, right? The white knight type of thing.
Hmm.
Because the idea of Star Wars is it's very timeless themes. It's good versus evil. It's not trying to be like a commentary on society. It's not trying to be, it's really more of a fairy tale than anything else. And that's why the good are extremely good and the bad are extremely bad and everything else. And then, of course, as, the franchise aged, they wanted to introduce other stories in there where, now you have like, the gray, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think ultimately,
Which David hates, by the way.
well, and I mean, in a lot of ways, I could see, because on one hand, yeah, you want some of these complex, because the problem with the whole like fairy tale type of thing is it becomes simplistic. And while you can have simplistic overtones, you want complexity in your storytelling as well. And this is one of the things that I think George Lucas did very, very well as far as the balance goes. And he did that by having the Sith and the Jedi represent the fairy tale, black versus white, right? It's kind of like the villain versus the hero. And that you keep pure. But when you have the rebels versus the Empire, that's where you can get a lot of your more humanized storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And so he balanced that perfectly. But then what happened was Disney got a hold of it primarily and then started to try to make like everything that way. And then they even started to take the timelessness away by bringing all the social agenda woke stuff into it too. So I think that they're now starting to come out of all that. But it's going to be interesting to see where they go from here because, we're going over the Jedi philosophies right now. And then, of course, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to do a follow-up show, kind of like how we're going through the Jedi philosophies by bullet point, is do the Sith ones.
Yeah, we could definitely juxtapose that. And I'm wondering, and that's why I'm so, intrigued and hopefully, we don't know what's going to um be in this film. But I really hope that in the James Mangold um
He's the
film that
Dawn of
he's
the Jedi, right?
yeah,
Isn't
that's
he
what it's
telling
being called.
like the
Yeah.
interesting one or something, or the interesting one? I mean, the what was I trying to say? Oh, the origin story. I don't even
Origin
know why
story, yeah.
that came out.
Yeah.
Just like what?
The
What does that
interesting
even
one.
mean? I said it and I don't even know what it means.
Yeah, but if that's in the origin story, I think that's cool too because we can see the progression. Like, okay, how did it start out? We kind of know. Okay, when we got to Yoda, we know what that was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like, going through the Old Republic to the High Republic, you know, if they kind of encapsulate that as far as like the um what the philosophies were and did they change?
Right. So, in other words, from like the Dawn to the Old Republic, was there any discrepancies there? Like, were there changes there? From the Old
Hmm.
Republic to maybe say the High Republic, although that's a really big chunk of time, but all right, whatever. How much were the changes there? And then, of course, we know between the High Republic and the Republic, what do they call it? There's like a name for the original trilogy time period. I always forget what it is. But because that's what fascinates me. Like, I want to know that. Now, Thronkill says the Acolytes showed that not all Jedi are heroes. They could be scared, deserters, even trying to run away from a problem that leads to all their downfalls. Now, the fact that the Acolyte takes place during the end of the High Republic, what could have been happening, and again, poorly written show, all that other stuff, right? We're just talking about the lore of the Acolyte. You could make the argument that Yoda's seeing all this because in the last scene of the Acolyte, we saw Yoda,
Hmm.
the back of his head anyway.
Right.
So obviously he's back. Now, I don't know from the novels because I only read like 3 or 4 of the High Republic novels and there's like a gang of them. I read a number of the comics, but again, there's a gang of those too. Between when Yoda was on his sabbatical, I don't know at what point he comes back. Like, was that last scene in The Acolyte when he comes back? Did it happen in some of the novels I didn't read? I don't know. You guys know? Chat it in. Ronaldo probably knows. Ronaldo, I know you've read the stuff. But whatever the case may be, maybe this is when Yoda coming back sees the stuff that transpired in season 1 of The Acolyte and is like, yeah, we got to make some changes. That could very well, that could very well be.
Yeah, I mean, I like some of the stances that the Jedi take. Only using the Force for knowledge and defense. You know, and it's kind of like we always here comes the reference, but how we always compare to Cobra Kai,
Yep.
and that's you got like Cobra Kai has its set of boundaries like strike first, strike hard, no mercy. Miyagi Do is basically, hey, you only fight when there's absolutely no other option. They're more kind of like the Jedi way. Um, and I think that, when you look at a lot of their philosophies, I mean, yeah, some things work, but I think they don't leave enough room for extenuating circumstances, or as some people call it, a gray area. Because I think every situation, especially when you're dealing with something like the Force, it's almost like they're trying to contain it, and sometimes just because of the nature of what it is, um, it may not be the best thing to do, especially depending on the person,
But again, I
who's
think you
wielding
have
it.
to remember what Star Wars is, though. We're trying to humanize it too much. That's like reading a fairy tale and trying to be like, well, that's not realistic. The prince would never, that's too good. Somewhere between the prince and the guy that's like tying the woman to a railroad track or up into a tower somewhere, there's a happy medium and there's a balance there. Yeah, in real life, that's true. But that's not, once upon a time or a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It's like, that's the whole point that Lucas was trying to make, is that because I remember back even when the original trilogy was fairly new, a lot of people were coming to him like, because keep in mind, what are the other movies that are coming out at that time? Like Apocalypse Now and, all these like, because people were disillusioned from the Vietnam War. And that was one of the reasons why Star Wars did so well, was because the 70s was kind of a bleak time. And all of a sudden you had this escapism, fun that actually has a really good message. It's, it's hopeful and everything. And it just, it kind of put people in a good headspace, which is what a piece of fairy tale literature is supposed to do.
So you agree with David that they weren't too dogmatic?
Well, because here's the thing though. Yeah, I say all that, but, and that's true.
From a certain point of view.
But the thing is there's Lucas's version versus what it became. And the problem is that Disney in particular has corrupted the story enough that even in universe, it doesn't make sense. Whereas before it did. Now, what Lucas is trying to show was Palpatine, through corruptive means, was able to use the Jedi's own philosophies against them and bring them down, both from within and then also, from public perception.
Mm-hmm.
So from that standpoint, that's true, because that's kind of what he was trying to do. It was like, yeah, these guys are the ultimate good and their ways are right, but they were corruptible. So, I mean, from that standpoint, sure. Because the problem is they didn't see through it. And again, a lot of that is because Palpatine was blocking their ability. And had they not been so arrogant, they might have caught that. So now we got some chats.
Okay.
So David's like, apathy would destroy the society. You can be unwavering if you're right. Ronaldo says, to be honest, no idea when he came back. Ronaldo, dude, you're like usually my encyclopedia on this stuff. Well, you got homework now, all right?
Yeah.
And then Thronkill says, it's why the Sith deal in absolutes. Easy story to write instead of Jedi gray, white, yellow, nuance BS. Well,
Spoken like a true Sith Lord. That's what I'm talking about.
sure. I mean, and that's, there's something to be said for that too, right? Because the problem is, once again, this is what happens when you sell a property and you let people run with it. Now, here's the interesting thing to me, and this kind of goes back to something that we've been talking about for a while. All right, this is something that we have actually been discussing. You and I have been discussing this both on this show and even off this show for quite some time. And that is the fact that you had all these expanded universe writers perfectly. Sometimes they got silly. Look, we're not going to say that every expanded universe, now Legends book, is an incredible piece of literature. I'm not saying that. But as far as adhering to the vision, true, they did have Lucas, basically having to approve their stories. So there is that. But essentially, everything was fine. If Disney had just picked up the mantle, maybe for the first 5-10 years, floated stuff by Lucas, let him almost do what he was doing with the expanded universe, I think we would be looking at a whole different situation. But they didn't do that. Instead, they said, you know what? Star Wars is ours now. We're gonna basically do what we want. Okay, fair enough. You bought it. But at the same time, you have this whole, decades. You're right. Yeah. You have decades of stories. You have this just whole fleshed out lore. I mean, I remember how horrified we were when Kathleen Kennedy said, well, with Lord of the Rings, they have source material. It's not like you had that with Star Wars. And we're like,
yeah. What are you
really?
talking about?
Yeah. What are all these books and comics floating around? What are you talking about? In fact, if you had just done Timothy Zahn 7, 8, and 9, we would be having a different conversation. Well, we might still be having this one, but I mean, we would be, we would, all right. So now David has an interesting thing. He says, what's the point of having rules if you're going to be gray?
Well, because rules are guidelines. It's kind of like what Captain Barbossa said in Pirates of the Caribbean. It's more like a guideline. You have rules to set up a framework for things, but you have to understand within that framework there are nuances that may allow, or you have to allow for, like, anomalies to happen, and you have to deal with those accordingly. And of course, you try to test it or try it with the rule, but sometimes the rule is ineffective because of the nature of the case that you're dealing with. So you can't treat it like everything else by the book per se, because there are aspects about the conditions that wasn't thought of for the rule that was written currently. So that's why, I mean, look at laws. Like, think about it. Like, our legal system, right? Let's say 35, 40 years ago, yeah, you can walk into a courtroom with a cell phone. Why? Because they couldn't take pictures and they couldn't record. Once cell phones had that ability, now you have to adapt to it. You have to change because of that. So you have to change the rules, but until you can get to that point, you have gray areas sometimes where it's like, well, yeah, this could work, that could not work. Certain things may happen where it's like, you know what? This doesn't necessarily fall within or there's loopholes, shall we say, that people can exploit from it.
Well, and in addition to that, a lot of that's true too, but I find really the problem isn't so much the rules, it's the people. And basically, you had this thing to where you had a bunch of the Jedi at the time, and everything was pretty cool. But sometimes, like in the case of Obi-Wan versus Qui-Gon, and what you're talking about is it's sort of like it's not even so much the rule, it's the absolute adherence to the letter of the law, the rule, never deviate. You're not allowing the situation to dictate the outcome. Right? So it's basically like Obi-Wan. I mean, clearly there are times where it's like, dude, really? You're throwing this up? Nobody reasonable would actually bring this up right now. So a lot of times I think it's the people, and that's what becomes the downfall, is that, it's almost like they become almost too smart for their own good. They're kind of like, I know best. And that's why Palpatine was so easily able to undermine them, because they started to, and this is where it comes into your point a little bit, is that they're not thinking in terms of the situation and applying the rule to the situation. They're applying the situation to the rule. They're just basically saying, well, it says this, we can or can't do this, whatever the case may be. And they're not really thinking of what's going on. And it's allowing them to be undermined, which is one of the reasons why I really would love, and I keep going back to this, but I would like to see what basically led to what Yoda did. Because Yoda's wise, right? And Yoda himself wasn't really like a super dogmatic guy, really. I mean, when you look at, kind of his playful, nature and things that he would do. And, he was just like, he had the presence of mind, like, you know what? You see how Obi-Wan was dealing with Anakin. You know what Yoda did? Did he go up to him and start beating him over the head with the rules? He's like, no, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give you a Padawan that's like you. So now you're going to see from the teacher side somebody who's like you. And now you're going to learn what Obi-Wan was trying to teach you, because now you're going to see it from the other side. And that's going to teach you way more than anybody just telling you a bunch of this stuff.
I think you did that to me when we were working at the school.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, when you made me over the club and I had to teach the kids.
Yeah, because, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, it's real easy when you're not the one in authority to question it constantly. Like, why are you doing this? Are you sure this is the right move? Well, I wouldn't do it this way. That kind of thing. It's like, okay. Now watch what happens when you have to be the one in authority. Now you're facing the same problems. And then suddenly all the decisions that didn't make sense to you make sense to you. It's the classic, child growing up and turning into a parent themselves.
Yep.
And it's amazing how much those kids start sounding like their parents. Well, it's because they were parents. All right, so Thronkill says, was Anakin an anomaly or a nuance? And then before we answer that, he says, Yoda was go with the flow, Uncle.
Yes, Uncle Yoda's the cool uncle.
Absolutely, Uncle Yoda, man. I mean, well, he was an anomaly in a sense, because, here's the problem. This kid's heard, like, from the very beginning, like, you're the chosen one. You're the one that's going to bring balance to the Force. You're telling this kid at, like, a very young age that this is the thing.
Old, yeah, exactly.
So, that's going to weigh on you a little bit, right? I mean, you're going to, at some point, it's no different than, these kids who are straight A students forever, and eventually they kind of rebel against that because they're just expected to do this, and they almost like crack under that pressure.
Or they get tired of it. It's like,
okay, there you go. They get tired.
I just want to sometimes be, and I ran into, like, I had a friend and I played football with, Jermaine. And Jermaine, since, he was played PAL football, a little league football, and he was really good then. He gets to high school. He's the only freshman on varsity. And his brother, Brian, was all-star on varsity. And So of course everybody's looking at Jermaine like, okay, man, yep, okay, you're gonna follow after your brother. And Jermaine was kind of playing football, all throughout high school. So when it comes time to go to college, everybody's trying to figure out where Jermaine's gonna go. And he's just like, yeah, I don't want to play football anymore. And everybody's just like, what? What did he do all this for? He's like, man, just, you know, I wanted to complete it, but like now that I'm graduate, I'm not really gonna do this anymore. And that's kind of what your point. But I think to answer his question, anomaly or nuance, I think it's both because I think the anomaly is that like, okay, yeah, he is this super powerful, like his midi chlorian count is off the rails, it's higher than Yoda's. I mean, that's an anomaly. That's not something you see every day.
Right.
It's
Yeah, it's true.
nuanced. It's nuanced though because of his situation, because he's already 8 years old. He's already suffered a lot of trauma, and you're trying to right side right size that or turn that ship around, so to speak, in a positive direction when he's already dealing with so much already. You got to think about it, like he and his mom has seen enough, going through being sold as slaves. Then he's taken from his mom everything he knows. He's thrust into this world with a bunch of characters that he doesn't know. The one person he did bond with ended up dying before he can even say goodbye to him. Then you got his little sidekick or his Padawan now trying to teach you. At first, Obi-Wan kind of dismissed him, like, who the heck is this?
Yeah.
So then now,
What
okay,
did he
I'm your
say?
teacher
Oh,
now.
is it another stray you picked
Yes,
up or
another
something?
stray or something we picked up. Yeah, exactly. So now you got this kid who's like, okay, well, he's already seen the harshness of the galaxy already by being on Tatooine and being a slave and being treated as less than, and so he's kind of got a chip on his shoulder. Even the way he was talking to Saboba, just because it's like, all right, he's talking to this grown alien like he's his peer. I was like, dude, you can't even tie your shoe. Like, what are you talking about? So now we're at a point where, yeah, Anakin has all this trauma, and he has, like you said, Eric, the pressures of being the chosen one. He's he can't put his love in his mom anymore, or he doesn't know what's going on with his mom. And then again, another trauma happened. He watches his mom die. He couldn't be there to save. He has all this power and couldn't do anything to save her.
Yeah, in fact, Thronkill says Anakin killing the Tusken Raiders is a smoking in the boys' room.
Yep, exactly.
And he also said that pathetic life form was used. That's right. That is
Oh
what
yes,
Obi-Wan.
exactly. How harsh is that? I
Yeah, it's
mean,
pretty like.
jeez. So that's what I'm saying. It's just like he's kind of got a lot of just issues, and so I think those are the nuances. But it's like you kind of have to figure out how to manage that, and that goes back to my thing earlier when I was talking about Qui-Gon, because Qui-Gon kind of had somewhat of the formula, as it were, in the steady hand to kind of keep Anakin like, all right, yeah, I'm gonna let you go ahead and do this and try that, but okay, let's bring it back in. Where Obi-Wan is kind of like, no, do this or and do that. No more, no less. And it's kind of hard when you have a person who has immense power. It's like having a talent. And, you know, Eric, you being a musician, myself, being a martial artist and playing different sports, it's like, okay, sometimes you're the best in the room. And you know that you're the best in the room. And sometimes, not that you really want to show off, but it's like, okay, I don't want to have to go through these basic drills. And I know how to do this already. I don't need it, I don't need it read back to me. Like I can do this. Just let me do my thing. And it's like, no, everybody has to do it. And it's like, ugh. And he feels like he's being held back when it's like, look, I have the potential and I know now I have so much potential and I can do more. I don't shouldn't have to be stuck with these kids or these other people. Like turn me loose and let me see what I can do out here.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot of that. Ronkill says Qui-Gon was training day and Obi-Wan is Glee.
You want to go to jail or you want to go home?
And I mean, I think a lot of that is true. You see a lot of times when Anakin was held back when he didn't think that he should be, but again, in a lot of ways, Anakin had to learn the same lesson that Poe did. You can't always solve everything by your strength, and a lot of times your strength does not equate to wisdom. Just because you're the chosen one, you're the chosen one because of how powerful you are. You're not wise yet, and I think that he didn't even have the wisdom to realize that. So that, of course, added to a lot. But I mean, there's a lot, and it'll really be interesting to do the Sith version of this.
Oh yeah.
Because I mean, obviously we know, with the Sith, I mean, right out the gate, I mean, don't even have to wait to the show to say it. And one of the downsides of the Sith was that you gain power quicker, but it also consumed and destroyed you. So, there's that. But it'll still be interesting to do the show. Nonetheless, I don't know. Maybe there's not that much going on. It could be our next one. We seem to hit a little bit of a lull in the Star Wars news lately. Have you noticed that?
Yeah. It's kind of got a little quiet. I mean, there is some talk where they said there's some actor at Galaxy's Edge.
Oh yeah,
that
the new
looks
Luke
insanely
Skywalker,
like Luke
or something.
Skywalker. Yeah.
That he technically was. Yeah, I know. I read that too, and it's like, oh, he was technically recast. I'm like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
I thought maybe, they're announcing
Me too.
Sebastian Stan, and they're gonna do like, a movie in between episodes like 6 and 7 or something. And it's like, nope. Galaxy Edge, does that even count? I mean, can you really,
Right, that's like a theme park thing.
Yeah, it's like a theme. It's like,
I don't know if you can act for real.
Well, I
Like
mean,
you're not movie act.
It's not even that. It's like, well, yeah, right. But I mean, beyond that, it's kind of like, okay, they have like, somebody playing Cinderella at an attraction. They don't say Cinderella's been recast. I mean, what? No, they haven't.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of things. I don't know. Again, it's Disney irritating me again. All right. Well, do you have any closing thoughts on this?
No, man. I think this is cool. I think hopefully in the James Mangold, like I said earlier, in the James Mangold film, I hope they really kind of delve into how they got to the philosophy, what made them, and if it's concurrent, like if it's something that started back then and has always been, or is it something that changed over time? I'm really curious to see if they, go into that.
All right. Well, the only thing I'm going to add to that, is don't forget to like and, of course, subscribe to our channel. And then if you actually want to join our Buy Me a Coffee thing, we do that. It's like this whole like little membership thing that we got. You could be a Padawan, Jedi Knight, Jedi Master, or you could just donate $1 or $2 to us. It actually helps out the channel. So I haven't actually promoted any of that stuff in a while. I thought I would do it. I kind of missed it. But anyway, our poll, so it briefly went ahead to where people voted no, it wasn't, too dogmatic. It was 60-40. Now it's back to 50-50. So it'll be interesting. I'm probably going to put this poll officially up on the channel after we do the show, because I'm really curious on, we know where everybody stands that are watching live right now, but I'm curious on what everybody else is going to say. And of course, it goes without saying, like I said, hit the subscribe and the like button, but also participate in the polls. We have one up right now. I mentioned at the beginning of the show. It's talking about the battle of the female characters. It's about who do you want to see in a live action animation. Who do you want to see brought into that world next? Or even maybe they're not featured. Maybe they're just like a side character, kind of like how Ahsoka was in the Mandalorian. But I got like Mara Jade, Dr. Aphra, or Kira. So be sure to actually vote on that. It's on our community tab or, whatever right now. So check that out. I'll put this one up there, vote in that. And yeah, I guess until next time, like I said, one of the advantages of hitting the notification bell is you'll be able to see our incredibly elusive live stream schedule. I mean, we don't even know half the time when we're doing. I mean, I always want to say, oh yeah, you know, we're every Sunday at 8 or whatever, but it's like that's not always the case actually. So I don't know. I guess that's it. Thanks for joining us, guys. With that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.